Well, folks, we've got tea over here. If you would like some, I didn't make a pot of coffee because it's 5 o'clock in the evening and afternoon. So definitely help yourself to that. And without any further ado, I think we might just go ahead and get going. How's it going, everybody? Everybody doing good? Anybody been out to Taya today and seeing what's happening out at the rivers?
Yeah.
Pretty cool. We do have fish out there. We saw some gulls pulling fish from the river yesterday. These folks, Colton and Marin, were out there today collecting samples for today, and seems like we're getting everything going. So my name is Ruben Cash. Those that don't know me, I run the environmental department here at Skagway Traditional Council. We also have with us, as always, our program assistant, Colton Belisle, our new environmental technician, Marin Bickle, and then the program manager for the population study, Meredith Pokart. We're so stoked that you guys are here. And you know what, guys, I got a big problem. I am sick of counting stuff and I need your help desperately. So I got this giant basket of fish. I want to know how many fish are in here. So I'm going to put you guys to work. We've got 4 stations sitting around here, and we are going to do a little bit of counting. Yeah, so everybody come on over. We're going to use our PPE. We've got some rubber gloves there. They're all medium sized. They might be too big or too small, but everybody grab some gloves. This is also our chance to do a little bit of snacking. So here's what we're going to do a little bit. So once everyone's in position, I'm going to come over and I'm going to give you a little sample of fish. What I want you to do is I want you to count every single one of those fish. And each one of those fish that you count, I want you to snap off the whole tail section and stick that little tail section in your little cup here. And then put all the rest of the fish back on your tray. And we're going to mark down how many of those fish that we counted and marked. And that will be your task for now. We'll come back to it later. Is everybody on board?
Tails go in the cup.
Tails in the cup.
The
Fish go back here, and then we're gonna put the tally number. Yep.
What's the title of her tally?
Let's call it M. M equals whatever you guys count.
This is a very large.
So do you think we got close to counting how many fish there are in that total population?
No.
Probably not, right? There's probably gonna be another step, but yeah, thanks for helping with that. It's gonna be a big mystery and we'll come back to that a little bit
Yeah, don't
later.
even worry about it.
So this is an important subject, right? I would argue that Skagway sits here because of this little fish, because of the Grease Trail, where the indigenous people would take their beach goods, including Yulacon grease, up and over the pass to trade with relatives in the inland. And so it's important that we take a look at these fish. We know that down south they're doing a little bit poorer than they are up here. And so at this point, we're on the cutting edge of figuring out how many there are. So to go over this, I'd like to take a 10,000-foot view. So I've asked our staff to come in and fill in the spaces. So I'm going to invite Marin up here to talk to you a little bit about the biology and ecology of the Yulacon. So everybody welcome Marin.
Hi, guys. All right, I'm gonna ask you to bear with me because the clicker is, it's wily, so. Let's see. All right, there she is. Look at her. Who is she? The Yulacon. The Yulacon is an anadromous fish, like salmon, so it's gonna be it's born in freshwater, adult life in saltwater, comes back to freshwater to spawn. Unlike salmon, it's coming back to spawn in the spring, not the fall. And it is the first big food source of the year. You know, if you're looking for a sign that spring is sprung, it's the Yulacon. So it is a fish of many names. We call it Yulacon. That is probably from the Chinook jargon, which is a pidgin language that was developed in the early 19th century to enable communication between English settlers, European settlers, traders, and various indigenous nations. And so we get Yulacon. It could be Ulacan, Yulacon, Ulichan, Ulacan, and of course, everyone's favorite, hooligan. And then the Tlingit word for the fish is Saak, and it translates to savior fish, or sometimes it's salvation fish, savior fish. It's also known as the candlefish and the fathom fish, and also smelt sometimes. because why not? And it does really earn all of those names, as we're going to talk about. So, Taliactis pacificus. That is our binomial nomenclature. It's from our genus name is from the Greek. We've got Thalia meaning rich, and ichthys meaning fish, and then pacificus because we're in the Pacific. It's a rich fish. Thank you. And where is it? Well, starting here close to home, two waterways we know and love, the Skagway River and the Tyre River. If we zoom out a little further, we can look at the entire Upperland Canal here. And we've got, play with me here. There, see, we've got, so we've still got, Skagway, Tyre, Ferriby, Chilkat, or Chilkoot, Chilkat, and then the Katsahine River, all of which are home to or have hosted Saak runs. And then if we go out even further to the entire Pacific coast of North America, if it doesn't, all right, there are 66 rivers and waterways along the Pacific coast of the continent that have where we see Eulachon spawning. There are 66 in Alaska alone. There are 30 in British Columbia, 21 in Washington, 16 in Oregon, and 6 in California. So that's a range going from basically all the way from the Gulf of Alaska down to about as far south as Monterey Bay in California. And yeah, there is a lot more rivers in Alaska than anywhere else. That's kind of just a function of, that's right, also just kind of a function of geography. We've got the most coastline. But this range is split up into 3 genetically distinct populations. So we have our northern population, which is everybody here in pink in the Gulf of Alaska. And then we get to our central, that's us. And that's going to be from north of the Fraser River through southeast Alaska. And then our southern range is going to be the Fraser River and south. And so this is a great map to look at because it shows us where all these rivers are, but it kind of doesn't show the full picture. The data set's a little oinky for a number of reasons. First of all, the thing is, like any given year, sometimes the run happens, sometimes it's a big run, sometimes it's a small run, sometimes they might just skip you entirely. We don't super duper know why. Like, for example, this year, usually we can count on Burner Bay, further south, having a run, and like we can kind of time the run that we have here in Skagway. It's going to be like about like 3 weeks generally following when they hit their peak. And this year, first of all, we had a really bad winter. We had a cold winter, and so everything got kind of pushed back a few weeks. And Burner Bay had a really light run this year. And so there's a lot of stuff where it's like we aren't entirely sure what it is. But we have, you can guess. It's like, is it temperature? Is it precipitation? Is it like, and that's kind of the reason that we are doing the work that we're doing in the field is to establish a data set so we can kind of look and see what are the variables, what's affecting what, how does it all, come together. And the other thing about looking at a map like this is that, again, it shows us the rivers. The thing is, though, Eulachon aren't like as great of swimmers as a lot of other fish are necessarily. Like nothing against them, but so they are anadromous and they will be running up that stream, right? Anadromous, that's what it means. They are up running. We have, some fish that are anadromous, like a coho salmon that we would see, way inland. It's like, oh, what are you doing here, buddy? How'd you get all the way up that waterfall? Eulachon cannot pull that off. When they come up to spawn, they are not using that entire river system. They are generally within 1 kilometer of the mouth of the waterway in which they spawn. They are strictly in that tidally influenced zone. That's where they go, that's where they stay. So, spawning, when do they do that? Typically, it could be anywhere, again, depending on region, depending on what the winter was like. That could be anywhere from January to May. Here, it typically I've heard is in April, but here we are in May, and we only just started seeing fish out in Taya yesterday because they're cute. They like to keep us on our toes. And this generally will coincide with those spring river pulses as things are warming up, as the glaciers are melting, as you've got that, it's just all coming downstream. It's, the water's starting to get silty, it's starting to get warm, that's when they're going to start showing up. Typically, they've got about a 6-year lifespan. And again, typically, they're very big on typically. They don't seem to like absolutes. But generally, they'll be spawning between ages 3 and 4. It has been seen that they've spawned at age 2 or 5. Because why not? Again, thus the study. Spawning run size can vary from year to year, as I mentioned. Burner Bay, super small run this year. There was a run a few years ago. I think it was in 2019. I remember Ruben showing me footage, and they were just thick. You could have walked across the back of them. And again, it's kind of like how salmon have on years, off years. That's part of it. Again, thus the work. That's why we're doing these. Why we're out in the field in our waders. And it is also a good way to spend a Monday afternoon. So the egg, they've come back, they've spawned. The eggs are small. We're talking like about a millimeter. They're little. They're very little, and they are sticky, which is what prevents them from getting just immediately swept out to sea when the tide goes out. Because again, they're in that tidal zone. A female can lay right around about up to like 30,000 eggs per fish. So they lay them. They are laid over sandy, gravelly substrate in these tidal zones. And they're actually the eggs have 2 layers. And upon laying, the outer layer kind of pops and they put down a sticky little foot called a peduncle, which is a great word. Wish I had a chance to use it more often. That kind of sticks them to the sand and keeps them from getting swept one way or the other. And again, it is very important that they stay where they are laid because they need that not too salty, not too fresh, tidally influenced zone. There's, if they are exposed to that salt water, it can be fatal. Like anything above, we measure, one of the ways we measure salt in water is parts per thousand. Anything above 16 parts per thousand, from what I've read, will your eggs pretty fast. So they need to be in that kind of fresh to brackish area. Once they hatch, they become this beautiful creature. And I was doing reading about them and I kept seeing the word larva mentioned and I didn't quite get it. I was like, why are they called larvae after they hatch? And then I saw the picture and I was like, oh, yeah, that's a larva. That is a creature. Bless his little heart. He's doing his best. So what you see there in the stomach, that's actually remnants of a yolk sac. In a salmon, we'd call that an alevin or a yolk sac fry. And that is a little bundle of nutrients. That's the remnants of their yolk from when they were in an egg to kind of bridge the gap between when they first hatch and are this very small, objectively helpless little thing that cannot hunt for itself yet. It kind of bridges the gap, I would say. And again, not a whole lot known about what they're doing in this juvenile stage. We believe, like a lot of research has said that they're hanging out in the estuary. They're eating other larvae. They're eating phytoplankton, copepods, which is slow shrimps, barnacle larvae, just basically what's smaller than them and that they can eat to get them to the adult stage where they will leave the estuary at about the age of 1 year and go out into the open ocean and earn their nickname of fathom fish. They have been found at depths of up to 625 meters, which is pretty impressive for a fish that is this big. But they are driven to those depths because they are in search of food. They are eating. They are doing the thing that, similar to salmon, similar to any other anadromous fish. They are going out into the ocean because that is where the nutrients are. There is a lot more to eat out in an ocean than there is in a creek. And what are they eating? They are eating plankton. They are in a class of what we would call forage fish, which are fish that they eat plankton. So this would be our eulachon, capelin, and sand lance. These are all fish so they're eating copepods, again, that's shrimp, and then euphasids, which are krill. And this is a really important kind of spot in our trophic levels in our food web because they bridge a gap between, is anybody familiar with the trophic levels? Yeah. So, we've got our primary producers down there with our bacteria, our phytoplankton, our nanoplankton, which are then, fed or feeding our primary consumers. And it is organisms like forage fish that will consume our primary consumers and do a great job of passing that energy along to our higher trophic levels. You know, basically, zooplankton are kind of too small for anything much bigger to eat efficiently. And forage fish do a really nice job of, eating them and storing up that energy so that something bigger can eat them. It's very considerate. So when we talk about them eating these plankton and storing energy, how do they do that? Great form of way to store energy is in fat. And so we see like the sand lance, of its body mass, 3 to 6% of that will be oil. For a capelin, that's anywhere from 2% to 10%. And for your friend and mine, the eulachon, that is up to 1/5 of its body mass that is oil. That is a rich fish. And this makes them a very desirable food source. For whom? See if it does it. Literally everything. They are a desirable food source for anything that eats fish, anything that can get a hold of a fish would be jazzed to get a hold of a eulachon, especially early in the spring when there's not really a whole lot out to eat yet. To have something come along and come back to spawn that is up to 20% fat that's why it's called a salvation fish, because that is a very dense nutrient source and it is essential for all sorts of other fish. We see like sturgeon, sharks, flounder, salmon, Dolly Varden, halibut, cod, all eat alevin. We see think of all the if you've been down to the point, if you've been out to Taya, you've seen a lot of ducks, you've seen a lot of birds. They're all there waiting for the Saak run. I sure would like to see a bear or a wolf coming out after the fish. I haven't yet. It'd be neat. I know that you, Ricky, have seen the whales. Whales are also very excited about eulachon. The sea otters, sea lions, seals, and of course us humans. You're all when it comes to I don't know when it comes to an early spring food source, it's a good one. And speaking of humans, Colton, I will now be passing the clicker over to the lovely Colton Belial. Come on, to talk about the humans. Oh shucks, thanks.
Hello. I'm going to be talking about kind of how eulachon, the role eulachon play kind of in Tlingit culture and how Tlingit groups would use them and process them and store them, and kind of how they kind of get a lot of their iconic history behind them. So, as Marin said, there's lots of names they go by. One of the more literal names is candlefish, because with their high oil count and all their body fat they have, they can be kind of dried out and then just used as a candle if you light them and stick them somewhere. They are an icon and a staple of Tlingit culture throughout Southeast Alaska, revered for their high oil content, their role in the Tlingit diet, and their trade value they have all along the coast. So typically, as Marin said, the eulachon season is between late winter and early spring, kind of as everything starts waking back up and thawing, and when they start to come inland to spawn. And typically, depending on kind of what group you're looking at, fishing is usually done with traps, hooks, hand nets, and dip nets. And Marin touched when they do have like a full run coming on. We don't really see this here. We don't have runs this run here typically. But when they really get running, as Marin said, the river basically goes black with them, and you can probably walk across their backs over the river. This makes them really easy to collect using dip nets, which are traditionally made of sinew back in less modern times. As iron was introduced, they upgraded to kind of rakes that they would use to rake through the clouds into their canoes. And the primary use of Yulicon was their oil and their fat. And it's kind of the key to their identity throughout Southeast Alaska among these Tlingit groups. Uh, Oil was typically used as butter or as seasoning in dishes, used as a dip you could dip food into. And then also because it has antioxidant and anti-pest properties, it was used to preserve other foods such as berries and crab apples and fish eggs for the winter. Because when it came to the summer, to Tlingit tribe, it was all about bulking up for the winter. Their main mission was storing as much food as that they needed to get through that winter. So a byproduct of this Yulicon helped preserve other foods for this winter, and then they themselves would also be preserved for the winter, and their oil will be used for be let me restart that sentence. So we're preserving berries, crab apples, and fish eggs with this oil. And then it's being set aside to be used throughout the winter as a dip, as a seasoning, and for trade, set aside for trade with other tribes throughout Southeast. These properties the oils have that were often used in dishes also leads to the oil being valued as a traditional medicine. Taken orally for ailments such as arthritis and tuberculosis, rubbed on the skin to treat abrasions and rashes, and with its vitamin A, iron, but high vitamin A, iron, and fat contents taken as supplements to kind of help with just general wellness. Okay. Economically, this oil was a vital trade item among tribes who did not have either, they didn't live near their own Yulicon bearing streams, or they did not have access to Yulicon bearing streams that they were near. So they would trade out of their tribe with other tribes for this oil. And it was so highly prized by many cultures throughout Southeast Alaska, into Canada, and kind of anywhere you could anywhere along these grease trails that would run inland and along uh, coastal areas that didn't have their own rivers. Locally, before the gold rush, generations of Alaska natives used the Chilkoot Trail as one such grease trail that the Chilkoot Trail was a really popular one of these grease trails that would kind of lead into the interior of Alaska and up into Canada to kind of trade with the more inland tribes. The Tlingit, Haida, and Nootka, who called Vancouver Island a home, did not have Yukon rivers of their own, nor did they have the right to fish the ones that were closer to them. So Haida and Tlingit fishermen would meet the Shimsham tribe nearby the mouth of the Nass River, where the Shimshin would fish and make their trades for oil, and they would often trade furs or whatever local resources they had that these exchanging tribes didn't have. And then the Tlingit manner of gathering this oil typically consisted of digging a pit along their shore and burying an old canoe kind of up past the top of it in sand. And under the sand, they would fill with fish, and then they would let it sit there for a couple of days and kind of ripen. And then they would take the fish out and then fill it with water and then start putting heated rocks in the water to kind of heat it up. And then as the fish boiled in the water, they would use bowls and kind of spatulas and anything they could to kind of scrape the oil off the top. And then as the oil coalesced on the top, they would put them into baskets, seal those baskets, and set them off to the side. Preserving Yulicon would often be done by cleaning the fish, cutting them into slivers, and then hanging them to dry on racks. This was typically only done to any excess fish that were caught after they had met their perceived oil quota. So they would harvest oil and they would harvest grease until they had as much as they think they needed. And then any excess fish past that limit is what would be preserved as food storage throughout the winter. And then additionally to this, fish would just be eaten fresh as it was caught in a manner of dishes and recipes, or you just put on a spike and roast it over a fire. But culturally, the Tlingit and many other tribes would use this fish as a major food source and gift during ceremonies and potlatches throughout the region. Yulikan oil would be drank in grand quantities during celebrations, and many families would share oil that they had as gifts and kind of share them with friends and family throughout the tribe. And when it comes to the fish themselves, they carry their own ceremonies within the many cultures throughout Southeast Alaska. Various cultures had different ceremonies for when the fish started running. Chiefs would often meet the start of each season's run with a special welcoming ceremony and a song welcoming the fish into their lands. Some tribes would prepare the first fish caught with special recipes to kind of celebrate their coming for the year. And then you have all these other animals, lining up and meeting at the mouths of these rivers for fish. And these ceremonies, you have everything coming together, special skins leading to special outfits and gloves and hats that would be worn during these welcoming ceremonies for these fish. And then many ceremonies ended coming back to our candlefish comparison with ceremoniously burning the fish in a manner to kind of welcome in the feast, and then ending with a prayer in all these ceremonies. And now I will welcome Ruben back up, and we can learn how we count our fish.
That means it's time for you guys. You guys ready for phase two? All right. So, yeah, counting fish. So we got Grease Wave, all these animals following this thing up. It's the first big protein source of the year. We've got people all across the western coast of North America that have been naming it all these different names. Obviously, this is an important fish. We've got a declining population down south. We need to understand what's happening. And so that is why we started this population study, so that we could figure out, what does Alaska's Yukon population look like over time? What is the run timing? What is the magnitude? So the question of the day is, how do you count fish? So why don't we all join ourselves again? We've got 4 stations around these trays, and we're going to be counting out fish. Here's the way it's going to work. This time, you guys are going to count the total number of everything that you pull out of these little subsamples, and that's going to be the little bits and pieces that you've clipped off. This will be a little bit wonky, right? But there's going to be some smaller bits in there, but we'll do our best. So we're going to count the total number of fish, and then we're going to count the total number of marked. So you want to make 2 different piles, and we're going to tally it over there. And basically the total number of fish is going to be this C. You'll see a little spot on your sheets to write down your C value. And then the total number that are marked is going to be your R. So then you're going to write down that metric. Everybody on board for that?
It's marked with the road.
Mark with the ones that are broken,
See,
yes.
the C is like just the whole fish, and then the mark.
Oh, and not including the marked
Not
fish.
including
Oh, it's a good thing you're here. I would have let you all astray on the maths. The maths would have been all wrong. Okay, so,
C is whole fish, and then the R, which are your marked fish.
all right.
Yeah, broken.
That caveat is now clear. Everybody good and on board? Let's move to our station, and I'll get you guys some subsamples. Science is so delicious. How was that for everybody? Crazy. So what was like the highest count in the groups? Like 100, 85, somewhere in 100 in there. Yeah. So decent amount of counting. So that's what we just did is called a mark recapture, and it's one of 3 techniques that I'm going to talk about. It's a statistical technique. Let's get back to here we go. So mark recaptured. So you catch some fish and you mark some fish, and then you let those fish go. You let them mix back into the population. Then you catch some more fish. You count all the marked fish, and then it's time for some maths. And what this does is it gets you to arrive at basically an estimation of the total abundance of a population, but it is definitely a huge amount of effort to do this. So for the Yulicon population study, they've been doing it at the Chilkoot River since 2014. 2010. So a decent amount of years doing it there. Costs upwards of $20,000 a year to fill out the crew, to get everything done. It's weeks and weeks and weeks on the river with 10 plus people. And here's some of the results that you can see from 2010 all the way to 2024. You'll notice that 2020 through 2022 is mixing. That had to do with the pandemic, of course, in 2020, which just so happened to be a huge bumper year in Chilkoot. So sad to miss those data. But then 21 and 22 didn't really have fish. But you can see we've got this estimation. So the estimation in millions based on this large recapture technique. There are a number of assumptions that can't necessarily be met, which is like it's a closed population. In this little experiment we did, we definitely have a closed population, right? We don't have goldfish that are coming and leaving from that population. We know that it's closed. It's a little bit skewed because we're breaking the fish, so the marking is actually violating the second assumption, which is that the marking does not affect the catchability. So the catchability, we kind of destroyed some of those things in there. So yeah, violated that assumption. But just to give you a picture of why this is so intensive, you guys were counting, 100 of these things at a time. Oh no, that's not what we want. That is. So why don't we look at 2010? The initially marked ones and clipped were 8,000. And then the total in the second sample captured above the weir was in the 20,000s. So that kind of gives you a gauge of why this takes so much time, so many people, and so much money. It's very intensive, but it gives you a very robust estimation of that total population abundance. And we will work out, Meredith right now is working on the maths on this, and maybe we'll come back to it.
That's the N for that.
Oh, that is the N. Okay, who said 875, 870? You were pretty darn close. Anybody else take a guess at how many were in there total? So 939 is the number that we estimated with that mark recapture, and here's our number. Pretty cool. Statistics actually work.
And then
990, so
your confidence intervals are from 1,080 down to 787.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, so
we're
well
within
within
our
that confidence interval, 990, not too bad, right? So this is obviously a nice, robust way to estimate a population without having to count every single one of them. Count 990 of these, well, with all of you here, it probably would have been pretty easy. But you're talking about millions and millions of fish, that's going to get a little sticky. So another method that you can use if you don't have $20,000 a year and 10 people is this catch per unit effort. And this is basically how many fish did I catch and how much time. And this is a good thing to use when you've got like a fishing fleet because the boats can all do this. And it kind of gives, and it's not a total abundance, but it's a relative abundance. So you can kind of look at the timing and like relative, like when the fish were coming in, how much they raised in that central time. It's a moderate effort compared to doing the mark recapture. I don't have metrics on how much it costs, but the Park Service and STC did this from 2016 to 2019. They were coupling it up with larval outdrift, where they were taking phytoplankton nets on a little bongo frame so that they could capture 2 of them, and they were just counting how many of these larvae were floating down the river afterwards. Both of these methods, the mark recapture and the catch per unit effort, allow you to get some metrics on the fish. And you probably want to do that because it is very invasive. So if you're in there catching the fish, you might as well sex them, age them, and get their sizes. And it does also have some more assumptions: constant catchability, is your equipment all in the same place? Is there uniform distribution in the river? Is the CPUE proportional to the total population? Some of those just can't be met. So everything is going to be somewhat imperfect. So we have adopted a much easier way to do this using environmental DNA. And Meredith is going to explain this with a little bit more science than I can. It's not really my wheelhouse, but it's totally in hers when we go over some of the data. But basically, early methods of eDNA were just like binary detection. Do you have this rare boreal toad? Do you not? But because of the work that we're doing on this project and other work similar to it, we've now gotten to the point where we can calculate the relative abundance, or the total abundance, I'm sorry. So it is a great and robust alternative to mark recapture if it's calibrated. You got to take into consideration like river discharge, size of the run. Definitely way lower effort than the previous two. You can get a couple people out in the river, one person in the lab. What do we do? Like 8 weeks of pretty intensive sampling and done. The lab takes care of everything else. Doesn't allow you to catch those other fish metrics, but it also means that you're not in there harassing the fish. And you've got so much extra time. If you wanted to go out and sex and size fish, you can do that in your free time. So the basic idea is that we go out and we collect 1 liter samples from 2 sites on each river. And for quality assurance and quality control, we want to make sure that everything that we're doing is all above board. We collect triplicates, so 3 samples for each sample site. That's why we've got so many bottles. And the thing I like about this slide is it shows how our sampling gear has changed over time. We have to work really sanitary. We're working with DNA, right? So everything's got to be really super squeaky clean. Started out with a lot of single-use plastic. We graduated into this like reusable Nalgene bottles and these glass filter funnels, and we found out really quickly that we're terrible at handling glass, and so we switched to these plastic filter funnels, which are much less likely to be destroyed by people like me. So once we get those samples, we come on back to the lab, and we've got this lovely little manifold here, and we filter that water through this very fine mesh filter. It's about 0.45 microns, and that gathers all that shed DNA. And as the rivers get siltier and siltier, this goes slower. So you can see this sample from Friday. It takes about 25 minutes to get all the way through the entire river sample. And we're not even cooking yet. We're going to get much more turbid in the days to come. I've got some samples that after we're done here, I'm going to go filter. I'm expecting to be in the lab for another 4 hours. So it's definitely one of the more time-consuming parts of it in terms of what the eDNA does. Another layer of QA and QC, we want to make sure that all of our equipment is nice and clean and that we're sanitizing things correctly. So we do this equipment blank. We use the same filter funnels, all the same stuff, and we pour tap water through it. And look how much faster this goes. It's like 90 seconds for clean tap water. I just thought that was a nice, stark, interesting contrast. So that's the basics of all of the lab work. And where do we sample and when? Well, it's all about the rivers, it's all about the tides, and it's all about the wildlife. So let's zoom on into our favorite 2 rivers here, the Skagway and the Taya River. These are both dominated by glacial discharges, so it's not reacting so much to precipitation events. It's going to have the highest Q or discharge in the middle of the summer when all that glacial melt's coming down. That also means that it's murky, brackish water, and that's great for a eulachon larva that doesn't swim very well and wants to stay away from creatures that are a little less euryhaline, that don't handle the low salt content. So because they have that low saline, they kind of have this little safe haven in these estuaries. What you're seeing here is an animation that I'm way too proud of, and you're going to see more of it over the next few slides. But this is LiDAR data that was flown by the state in 2023 that's been turned into a shapefile that shows the different tide levels. Caveat on this, if you guys are watching this and you know Dyea does not flood all the way up to the conifers at a high tide. You guys should probably know that. So this hasn't been calibrated entirely, at least this set here. You might get that really extreme tide if it was a king tide and you had a storm surge, like a big south wind. That might push that water and pile it up a little bit further. So just that caveat as you're looking at this, I do intend to take drone imagery that we've captured and calibrate this data set so that we can actually put the tide levels where they are. And for next year, that's going to be really handy for figuring out when we go out and we sample, because we want to sample at that low tide, right? But we don't know how far that inundation has gone, so we can have a little bit more leeway on when we start and when we stop. So sample locations should be where the fish are most abundant, right? And if you're a eulachon and you're a poor swimmer, you're probably using the tides to ride up into some of those little low-lying back channel areas. So we choose one site that's closer to the estuary so we can capture kind of everything that's in there. And then we have another site that's more of a river site that's closer to the upper tidal reach of where the river gets filled in by the tide. So let's take a look at the Skagway River. The Skagway River has a very steep gradient compared to the Taya River. Here's our little title animation. It's just so cool. This one's much more accurate to what you'll actually see. Again, a king tide is going to cover this little thing usually sticks out even at a high tide, but at the really, really high tides, that's all covered up. The Skagway River is constricted. I don't know if you've noticed, but we have an airport that just kind of lines the river and it's all riprap and armored. And so everything in the Skagway River is super constricted. And you've got all that water coming down from the watershed and it's like putting your thumb on a hose. It just gets shot out the estuary. And so you get much more both deposition and erosion happening. And so the gradient's not going to be like what you would expect in a natural river. This also makes it more difficult for a poor swimmer like the Yulikon. So we typically don't see as many fish in this river as we do in the Taya. So when we do our wildlife observations, we're trying to compare apples to apples. So we try to hit it right at the low tide every time. So we're not comparing, who hangs out at the low tide versus who hangs out at the high tide. They're two different groups of animals. So at the Skagway River, it's such a small range between those low tide lines. You've got a low tide at -4, and then, a week later, your low tide is at a 2 foot, right? So it's not going to change much. So this little observation site here, we just sit up off the fence at Temsco. We make sure the helicopters aren't running a course. And we're able to see all the way to the edge of the low tide line, or if the tide has come back in, we can see things back up in there as well. And then our two river sites, they're pretty close together. Part of that is a function of it just being a very high gradient and a small tidal range, but part of it is also for safety. Sandbars are shifting, the river's constantly moving, and when it really gets cooking, we got to cross that, carrying waders, carrying bags, carrying sampling equipment, and it becomes dangerous. So we try to sample in the same spot. We try not to sample where it's braided, try to get to a single channel, but the site has moved several times as the river has changed that estuary in the layout. So let's move over to the Taya River. Taya River is much lower gradient, a much more substantial tidal range. And it's only really constricted in a very short reach. And that short reach is kind of off the map. It's where the bridge crosses over. That's all armored, has a bunch of riprap, and we suspect that that's changed the hydrology in such a way that it is starting to carve into this area here. And then further upriver, there's a little bit more riprap that's protecting some homes. But for the most part, this is a wild and free river. There's oxbow lakes, there's little back channels, all these places that the fish like to go. So because we've got this much larger tidal range, we have two observation sites. We've got this one that's kind of up on right before you drop down into Dai. There's a little lookout and some signage there from the park. And that gives us a good higher low tide location where we can see. And then for those super, super low tides, we go down to Wayne's Place here. It's the whole house that's on the rocks off the side. And Wayne's Place is our favorite. It's really nice. If you get a really nice day when there's no wind, boy, we could stay there just all day counting birds. And some days that's kind of what you have to do because there are thousands and thousands of different kinds of animals down there. And our river sites are much farther apart than in the Skagway River, and that's to be expected, right? Because it's the larger tidal range. We did move the estuary site for safety reasons. We used to just drop down off of the rocks, off the revetment, right down into the river. And my boss told me that I can't do that anymore, so we moved it to the other side of the river, so I don't put these guys in danger. So that's the Taya River and the Skagway River. Usually what we do on a typical year is we start our observations of wildlife daily, starting in early April. So there's our old environmental specialist, Eric Dye, looking out for something out there, counting birds. Everybody who's participated in this program suddenly becomes a birder as well. We're usually just counting, gull-type ducks and sea mammals, but we've started breaking it down into the different types of migratory waterfowl that come through. It's a really cool, diverse time to be in Skagway when all of these animals, the flyover species, come through. There's trumpeter swans and widgeons and teals and just all sorts of stuff. It's very, very cool. Usually we get what we call a zero sample somewhere in the second week, and that's when we know there's no fish and DNA in the river, so we know that we've got most likely a sample that's just nice and clean, no DNA in it. And we do 2 times sampling every week until we see an uptick in wildlife. And then we go to every other day. And then the next thing that we're looking for is actually fish in the river. Once we actually see those fish in the river, that's when it's game on and we start sampling daily. That's the reason that I'm here. I've been here for 18 days trying to be back up to these guys. I leave tomorrow and the fish showed up in the river last night. So if anybody wants to volunteer to help these guys, they're going to need the help. So then basically we just work it in reverse. Once everybody starts packing up and hitting the road, we'll taper off in the same fashion. We'll go down to every other day. Once the wildlife drops off, we'll do a couple times a week, and then we'll get our last samples and we'll call it good. So we realized that we didn't do any outreach for 2024, so I'm going to touch lightly on 24 and focus mostly on 2025. I think the most important thing about both years is that we did early sampling because we had reports from the community that there were fish runs, and we wanted to know what it was, whether or not we were actually seeing the Saak in there. So it was February in 2024 that Eric and Colton had to go out there and freeze. I probably should have put a picture up of their waders with ice just covering. It was brutal early mornings. In 2025, it was March that everybody went out. It was still pretty cold. And it was also in 2025, they started seeing like an uptick in the number of seals. There was more piscivorous birds going after something out there. So we're trying to just capture whatever it was. And so then things quieted down. Very quick, first part of April, there was just about nothing out there, and it stayed pretty quiet for a while. So this was a good time to practice counting birds, practice our ID, getting good photos of wildlife, checking out some of the sea mammals. And then about the middle of April, the birds started picking up again, and so we started doing a little more concentrated sampling. Birds doing what birds do. I can identify that kind of. Can you guys identify the ducks that are in the foreground there? As those bagos or
Teals.
teals? I think they're teals. Yeah, teals seems likely. Who knows? Anyways, so we're looking for birds, and of course we are always looking for fish. And Marin was giving me a little bit of grief, saying I don't think that he's actually looking for fish. And so I pulled up a couple of photos. This is the slide that always sticks. So hang on for a second. Here's all the photos that I could find of us looking for fish. We look for fish a lot. And it's kind of a different story here up in Skagway. It's not like down south where, you know, the fish run comes and everybody knows that it's happening. It's a little more elusive here. There have been a number of factors that have played into that. But we one of the metrics that we take is we do in our field book, we write down, do you see a fish, do you not? And so this is a histogram showing, you know, 2020 through 2024. On the left-hand side is the no's, on the right-hand side is the yeses, right? And so we saw a little bit of action in 2020, way less in 21, not much in 22, and then 23 and 24, we didn't see any. We didn't see any visuals. We were just kind of based on the wildlife guessing on when to sample. And so it was quite an emotional reunion for me. And I guess we're just going to shut the whole thing down. Let's try it again. Hang on, y'all. It's down here and right here. So it was April 26th, I think is when this came up. I rode my bike out to Dai, and I just happened to have the GoPro with me. And first time I'd seen fish in the longest time. 2020, I think, was the only time that I saw a real substantial amount of fish. So, you know, years and years of you know, waterfront activity that we thought was possibly keeping things away, and like just sensing that the fish were in the river and having to guess on it, and hoping that we had read all the signs correctly for the science because we want to do everything above board. So it was just really lovely to see these fish again. I did what that you're supposed to do. I sat down, I walked quietly, I sang a quiet song, and I just sat out here with a camera for hours filming these fish. We saw them in the Skagway River too. This presentation is problematic. And it's rare that we see them in the Skagway River. And the reason that I like this video is because it really does show how poor swimmers they are. You know, you can see through the water, so obviously it's not really cooking yet. But you can see them also just struggling to maintain their position in the water column. So not surprising that we don't see as many fish in the Skagway River. It is kind of surprising that they do find places to spawn just because there's so much kinetic energy pushing that water out. It's hard to imagine that there's little pockets like you see here of the sand and the small bits that they like to spawn on. So the season kind of continued as you would expect. Gulls were doing gull things, and the seals were out there doing seal things. We didn't really see a whole lot of sea lions, but seemed like it was a good run. And then towards the first week of May, things started to taper out, and by the end of May, we were pretty much done, finished with it. And so here's what we saw in terms of gull-like birds. The left side is the Skagway River, and the right side is the Taya. And to my eyes, I see two distinct little pulses here. They were after something here, took a little break after something here in the Skagway. It's a smaller pulse in the Taya, but it's still there. And then you can see this is that little kind of lone data point that prompted us to do those early samples. So that's kind of the gist of our 2025 season, and I would love to invite Meredith up here to talk a little bit more about eDNA and go over some of our data.
Thanks. Cool. Thanks, everyone. Thanks so much for having me here. I'm Meredith Pokart. I work with the Chilkoot Indian Association, or the CIA. If you know. But yeah, and we've been working with Skagway Traditional Council on this project for years and years, and it's such a great partnership. And so I'm just going to go over the eDNA. Oh, maybe I'll.
I think it needs to have just go back down to perfect.
So maybe I'll just do this. Sweet. Okay. So we'll talk more about this environmental DNA or eDNA component. We brought this in over in Haines in 2014. And as we said, we started doing this marker capture just on the Chilkoot River in 2010. That was great. Like we were measuring, getting good population estimates there. But it's a lot of handling of fish. And so for tribal members, a lot of folks were like, this is nice, but like you're really invasive. Like we're catching fish. You guys saw those numbers. Like we're going through like 8,000 fish like a year. Like that's a lot of fish to be handling. So in 2014, through his partnership with a professor at Oregon State, Dr. Tal Levi, he came to us and was like, maybe this like eDNA thing might work for like getting a population estimate. Like at this point in 2014, eDNA was not really used for population studies yet. It was mainly just like this presence absence thing, but it was like, you got this marker capture study you can compare it with. So like, why not just try it? So we started doing it from 2014 to 2017. We just did it at the Chilkoot River. Worked great. Like we got a really tight relationship between our population estimates with eDNA and our marker capture data. And so we're like, oh, this seems like this is gonna work. Like this is cool. And so then we branched out our eDNA sampling region wide. And so we'll kind of go over that a little bit too, but just to go over like this eDNA. So we're scooping water. And yeah, I love that little time lapse. I might actually have to steal that for like describing how we filter. But we're scooping water, we're filtering it all down. We're collecting all of that DNA just on a really fine pore size filter. And then there's different ways we can analyze that eDNA, those eDNA samples. Our approach that we're using is the single species approach. We're really just interested in the amount of eulachon that are in our samples. We can look at one species at a time. We can be really sensitive and really accurate with that amount of, with determining the amount of DNA that's in those samples. And it also is a lot less expensive. But just to like provide the other side of eDNA analysis to everyone, there's this other multi-species approach. And so this is kind of more of like your biodiversity assessment, where we could get like a whole snapshot of who's there. And this would be a really cool future study. Or if anyone wants like a grad school project or anything, like it'd be really awesome to kind of try to tie in like all the wildlife that is associated with these runs. And the beauty of it is that very same sample can be analyzed in multiple ways without any additional field time. So, and they're all archived. So we could go back to any of those previous samples. And so this is like back in 2014, we're kind of in this forefront of eDNA research in our minds and kind of like in the scientific worlds. We're like, okay, so there's basically these two questions, and we're gonna just try to tackle this one. Like, how accurately can we get an abundance estimate of this one species at a time? And so this is again our single species approach. And just to kind of talk through like where this DNA is coming from, because a lot of people are like, this is a little space agey, like what's going on here? And I definitely was like that at first. I was like, this is weird. Like, how can this actually be quantitative? But as Ruben mentioned, so we have the beginning, we always get our zeros before the fish show up. Like there is these like elusive winter runs that do happen, and there's a lot of traditional knowledge around them up and down the West Coast, actually, of these like January, February runs that do happen. So our zeros are actually never true zeros. They're just really low baseline levels, which is kind of cool also in itself. But so we kind of get our zero samples when fish are not present in the river. And then we have, then we have the spawning, like we have them actually in the river, this big pulse in DNA. This is from the actual like fish there, they're spawning, eggs incubating. We get this peak, and then we get that kind of gradual decline. We also have the larvae are migrate or not, they're incubating in the river for about a month after spawning. And then they just kind of get flushed out as they emerge from the gravel. And so you have this larval out migration. It has an additional kind of like final input of your DNA. And then you go back to your baseline. And so typically in a given year, we're trying to hit that full, kind of peak and then back to our baseline again is our goal. And the two metrics that we can use to gauge the overall size of that run each year is just that magnitude of the peak. How big was it that year? But really that area, actual like area under the curve, tends to be the more accurate like population metric to use. Cool. And so that map is kind of a really horrible map because you can't really see those locations on there. But yes, we started monitoring in northern southeast on the Chilkoot in 2014. In 2017 is when we branched out regionally, and now we're monitoring these 9 rivers, basically from Berners Bay north. Also with the Skagway traditional, or not Skagway, the Ketchikan traditional community. What is it for like? Indian, Ketchikan Indian community down in Ketchikan. They're monitoring the Unic River and the Yulakan River, which is a tributary of the Unic, using the same eDNA methods. And also the Yakutat Tlingit tribe is monitoring 2 rivers out there. So the same methods are getting used. And there's also a few different tribes down in BC that are using these same methods now. And so we kind of all switched over to this eDNA approach for monitoring. It's just way more feasible and economical, and yeah, we can monitor a lot more rivers with this approach. So this is a little crazy plot of all of their data for our 9 rivers in northern southeast. And so don't like squint too hard at any of this. This is a little crazy spaghetti mess. It's more just to show that like we can see these different magnitudes and different durations in our runs, and also our different timings of our runs. The Berners Bay rivers in particular, the Lace, Berners, and Antler, we're seeing these really like kind of just kind of strange timelines of when they're showing up there throughout our years of monitoring. And this isn't updated with 2025. This is an old plot, but you get the gist. Okay, and so now we'll kind of dive into the rivers here. So this is looking, just kind of breaking that out and to see our trend at the Tide River. And this is at our river sampling site. So this is that further upstream sampling location that Ruben pointed out. We can see kind of right off the bat here, we can see that like 2017, 19, and 2020 big runs. Those are really big years. This is also on log scale. So like those increases are big increases. Of those other ones. And yeah, we also see kind of our lower years and the shifts in timing sometimes too. So this is kind of what our data actually looks like. An interesting thing to also compare is the estuary, the lower sampling with the river sampling locations. They tend to mirror each other very nicely, which is good to see. And also our estuary sampling locations will likely have a higher or earlier pulse in DNA, which also makes sense, just lower down in the system. That's what you would expect to see. Yeah, kind of the trends there. And then we jump over to the Skagway River, seeing, yeah, really similar things. 2025 just seems like it's a really big year for the Skagway just because they were there, actually. And so, yeah, and also 2019. The interesting thing with 2019, it was a big, I don't know if I can go back to this overall. But if you can pick out 2019, I think it's mostly green and all of these. It was a big year everywhere except for the Chilkat. And on the Chilkat, they were doing blasting at the lower part of the Haynes Highway in 2019 during the Yulcon run. And we think that the Chilkat is just one of our like more massive runs in this whole northern southeast region. It probably is a huge component that this like, supports this whole regional population actually. But basically no fish went there that year. And so every other river was gangbusters. It was crazy. It was totally wild to see. And so they were just most likely displaced from the Chilkat. But having these other systems that they can go to allowed them to still spawn and allows that population to still have kind of, yeah, it can still go on, which is pretty great. And so that's kind of the beauty of these fish. They're not tied to their natal streams as much as salmon are. They can wander. They'll go to whatever river suits their needs in any given year. Cool. And then this is an updated, my apologies. I actually I thought I had wildlife data from last year, but I think I thought I didn't, but it turns out maybe I do somewhere. But this is just to see that the gull counts and the eDNA tend to line up really nicely. And actually one of the techs in the lab who analyzes all of our eDNA samples is quite a birder herself. And she's like, I don't like, you can keep sending me the samples, but you could also just count the birds. Like why, like they just go with the birds. Like they're not lying. So we do both. But yeah, we often see these really great peaks that just coincide with, you got a lot of birds when there's a lot of fish in the river and there's a lot of DNA all at the same time, which kind of makes sense. Another cool thing that we've been able to kind of tease out of this data set over the years is this kind of latitudinal grease wave that we can see. And this is really prominent just from Berners Bay north, like in our kind of northern southeast region. Like I think I forget who, maybe as Maren mentioned or Colton, one of them was like, we're kind of always, we're looking at our southern rivers of like, when did they spawn? Like what's going on down there? And Berners Bay was really low this year and really late. But there's this latitudinal migration that happens where we see the spawning happen in the southern rivers first, and they just kind of march north. That's cool because it gets us, like, allows us time to get ready. But also the biggest kind of ecological impact of that is that it allows all of the foragers and this really elongated foraging period. So they're following those fish the entire way. We have the sea lions, all the birds, like they're totally just like going along, and they get to feast for a longer time. If all of these rivers spawned at the same time, they would have to choose. And then you're kind of like, you instead of getting to like go to the buffet like repeatedly, you only get to go once. So it's really important for sea lions too. This is also like right before they give birth, and then the females don't eat for months, I think 2 months or a couple months at a time while they're nursing. So this is a huge source of high quality fat right before they give birth, which is really ecologically important. Cool. And then this is Ruben. It's pretty awesome to see that like transition that Ruben showed of how we started sampling with all that single-use plastic, and then we went to the glass, which we were like, this isn't that good either, but it's better. And then we're kind of at a really good system now. And now that everyone's at a really good system, I might change it up again next year, but hopefully for the better, hopefully. But so we're kind of working on setting up this new system where we would be able to filter our samples right on site at the river, which would be really cool. it kind of reduces the, like, potential source of contamination in our sample bottles, which is nice. And it's not a problem for Skagway. You guys actually have the best field blanks ever. You have no positive field blanks, but our other sites can't say that. Even my sites can't. So, having folks, like having the crew sample right at the river just kind of eliminates that potential source. And it also just, our DNA will be higher quality. It doesn't have that time to degrade between, when we're collecting it to when we're able to filter it and preserve those samples. So that's kind of what we're hoping to go to in the future. And the Soviet Indian Association now has an autoclave, and so we're gonna put together these little sampling kits that will still be reusable. Because we don't want to go back to that like single-use plastic pile of garbage at the end of the season. But yeah, this is kind of where we're headed. And yeah, let's get out there and look for
What we do.
fish. Yeah, I think that was all I had.
Could you maybe go back to I just was
Yeah.
curious to see the Skagway and Tire River plots from 2025 to see if there was in fact a couple of pulses or if there was just the one big, looks like it was just the one big.
Yep, so Skagway, no. I did have an early April.
Mhm.
But yeah, then we were saying that, yeah, I might be missing samples from
All right, yeah.
March. There's March samples. I don't have that data.
Interesting, cool, thank you.
So. Yeah. Any questions for any of us? About Yeah.
So like the salmon run, they come from the ocean as well and they deteriorate. Do you find you'll do that as well?
That's a really good question. There's so many unknowns of Yucatan. And if you look in most literature, it'll say that they are semiparous, like salmon, that they would die after spawning. We've never seen that in any of our systems, though. They all leave. And some do die. They get stranded. They're really bad swimmers, and so some just get stranded. Like that's it for them. But yeah, they leave the river after spawning for the most part.
Doing research for this, that sometimes it seems that male in particular will reabsorb their teeth when they
Yeah.
come into spawn. Like it's kind of, I don't know, salmon, when they come into spawn, they're done, they stop eating. And so we don't really know, what
Yeah.
they do after they swim back out.
Yeah, and that's part of the biological metrics that we take, part of the sexing and length and weight is we also look for teeth presence.
Yeah.
Which is kind of funny. They have really funny teeth. They just have 3 teeth, but one's on the top and then they have a tongue tooth and then they have a bottom lip tooth. Those are their 3 teeth. But yeah, it is true that the males will most likely have reabsorbed at least 2 of those 3 teeth, but the females will typically have all their teeth at spawning.
There's no way to tell their age.
Aging is really tricky. We've tried, and not but in the larger kind of Yucatan scientific realm, has looked into otolith, aging through otolith rings. It's inconclusive, and also isotope analysis has been inconclusive. And so there's different it's a constant question, especially because Yucatan in Washington, Oregon, and California are listed as threatened. And BC populations are listed as threatened or endangered, depending on where they are. So there's actually a lot of folks that are trying to figure out age and life history strategies of Yucatan, and no one knows. And so, yeah, it's a huge, because it'd be great if we could actually say definitively that we do have multiple age classes coming back, then we know that they are spawning more than once probably too. But yeah, it's a bit of an unknown.
What was the word for that when they die? Right after spawning?
The semiparous. And then the iteroparous would be a multi-spawner. Yeah,
I think that's it for usually how to pronounce unanimous, but I'm saying Canada draw with somebody.
Save the confidence.
Yeah. Yeah.
With the emphasis on where it's level.
Exactly.
Yeah, any other, has anyone here seen a hooligan? Like,
We caught one in the front farm.
2019, we were grabbing them out of the.
Yeah.
Our berries.
oh, cool, yeah, 2019 was, yeah, it was huge.
And that's why we have clean samples, because if it was like that, we would definitely have dirtier samples, like with those field mice.
Yeah, it's just that like all of our stuff gets so.
Yeah, like
contaminated.
waders and, gloves.
And the people too, like now I try to have like totally, which doesn't always happen, but it's totally separate people doing the like measuring and weighing and all that, and then like actually bring on like the CIA's construction crew for that, so that they don't care, and then I can have like clean eDNA crew. It doesn't get to handle fish anymore. But that doesn't always work, sometimes. Have to handle fish too.
Like Ruben and I, we switch, like we each have our, when we do our own river, when we're doing sampling, we're still wading through both rivers.
Yeah,
Splashing around, like.
yeah, there's just so many kind of
eh.
opportunities for contamination. And yeah, there's like, I mean, this DNA stuff, it's like, it's like crime scene, like mindset all the time. Like, we use a lot of bleach.
Got a murder apron out there too, because of all the bleach. I had like most of my hands are just bleach spots all over, so there's a big old Dexter plastic apron.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is like the biggest turnout we've ever had for these outreach events. So thank you all so much for coming. Oh yeah, and then if there's any other questions too, I'm not.
We'll get you some free vegetarian foods.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming out, everybody.
Yeah.
See you all next time.
Cool.
Great.
That's great.
Yeah, I really love marketing capture.
Absolutely.
Yeah.